Let's look at my take on the Dow theory comparison. And the Dow theory is about 120 years old, developed and studied by Charles Dow. And he used the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and the railroad average was the transportation mode back then. And the theory centers around identifying the trend for the Dow Jones Rail Average and the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which really hasn't changed that much since Charles Dow's day. There's 30 in it today, and I don't think it was much less back then. And it's a known fact that railroads are highly dependent on credit to expand their operations. So they're very susceptible to rate hikes and increasing costs to expand their operations, meaning inflation. And right before making this video, I made one using the Dow Jones Transportation Average, which encompasses all modes of transportation and shipping. And then I switched to just the railroad index like Charles Dow, and I'll tell you right now, there is very little difference between using the railroad average and the whole transportation index. So all the hubbub is about the transportation average not making new highs like the industrial average up here. So here we have a straight up bearish divergence, and then if you look at the bottom where the Dow Jones Industrial Average is bullish and the railroad index does not corroborate the industrial average's bullishness. And the weekly chart for the comparison, railroad index on the bottom, Dow Industrials on the top, corroborates the daily thesis of bearish divergence on the top here, and not corroborating the bullish trend for the industrial averages by the railroad index. And finally, the monthly chart of the comparison, Dow Jones Railroad Index on the bottom, Dow Jones Industrials on the top. It corroborates the bullish trend for the industrials by the railroad index here on the bottom, so we're in bullish mode there. However, the bearish divergence is quite glaring since 2020, when the stimulus and rate reductions by the Fed took hold here. So we're making a major new high here on the Dow 30 and not so on the railroad index. So the railroad index would have to exceed the low from 2020 COVID crash, and the industrials would still have to keep climbing or staying steady, and that would be a bearish divergence there for sure. So that's unlikely to happen any day soon. So let's focus on the glaring bearish divergence here between the railroad index and the Dow 30. So if the railroad index can exceed this high from 2022, and that would rectify that bearish divergence. And I say if the railroad index and transportation index for that matter, which is very similar to this, the transportation index doesn't have such a gap here between the arrow or the trend line and price at the moment. But if it exceeds under this uptrend line for the railroads, I would say that's going to be some trouble there. Till then, we wait for the bearish divergence to get rectified and not panic